when went back and reread some of these radical reactionaries a few years ago, and what struck me was how deeply drawn I was to many of their arguments. So they felt that it was important for me to wrestle with that, to understand the power of the attraction of tradition, of meaning, of holistic societies, and the perils of liberalism and the drawbacks of liberalism. I'm conflicted about this because I don't want to endorse this. On the other hand, I don't want to ignore it either. Ability in an open society to understand those who are not its fans or might be its victims even seems to me important.
I mean, what you're describing, Andrew, is actually one of the most essential moments and one of the most essential intellectual virtues that one needs to have to live in a liberal, open society. You were talking about your kind of the seduction, the allure, the attraction that you felt for anti-liberal forms of thought. This isn't a threat to or a danger to the kind of open liberal society. This is actually something really, really important to it. In 1941, Leo Strauss gives a lecture at the New School to a set of American students who are about to set off into World War II. And Strauss reflects back on his own experience as a student during the early part of the Weimar Republic, during which Strauss is encountering and wrestling with a lot of kind of radical right-wing views. And here's what Strauss says. It's super interesting. He says that one of the reasons why Weimar fell apart is that the liberal intelligentsia and the liberal professoriate couldn't really understand the deeply illiberal passions of a lot of his classmates. And rather than teaching them to better understand these kind of primordial passions, they wrote them off as kind of retrograde or atavistic. But Strauss says something really interesting. And I think what I'm hearing from you sounds Straussian. I don't want to put words in your mouth. Strauss says that in order to live in an open liberal society, you have to understand the allure and the seduction and the appeal of the closed society. You have to really understand why virtues of heroism and loyalty and bravery and belonging and sacrifice are important parts of the human condition. You have to understand why somebody would want to live like that. You have to understand what human virtues might be possible living that way. Now, neither Strauss nor you in your essay wanted to turn people into anti-liberal intellectuals or activists. Your goal is to turn people into better democratic citizens. But if Strauss is right, and I think you're right too, the way you just talked about it, is that you really have to understand the power, the kind of gravity behind forms of thought that are pre-liberal and non-liberal. After all, we're not simply talking about authoritarians here. We're talking about some of the greatest philosophers in our own Western tradition. Our ability, Andrew, to think about liberalism, to think about our life beyond the boundaries that liberalism sets to it, is essential for preserving any liberal practices that we might want to have.
Yes, absolutely. And the failure of the current American left to understand that is an extremely dangerous development for them, as well as for society as a whole and democracy as a whole.
There's a kind of paradox here, which is worth contemplating and maybe worth thinking about more, which is that in some sense, liberalism relies on moral and spiritual traditions that it can't create, and that in some sense are opposed to liberalism. And also that liberal practices, liberal traditions are sometimes most deeply threatened by liberal ideas and liberal ideals themselves. That means that for any liberal society worth preserving, that liberalism has to and must and exist in a kind of tension with non-liberal ways of thinking and non-liberal ways of living.